Hello, Sarah of SEK Handmade here, and we are back for another Meet the Maker, a very special Meet the Maker. June is all about pattern testers and pattern testing. I'm doing a whole series of informative videos about pattern testing, so if you haven't checked those out, do that. But I have to say I've been having some of the best conversations with pattern testers in my Meet the Maker series. These are all happen to be wonderful ladies who do pattern testing and are experienced. And it's just been so much fun to chat with them and get to know them better, but also to hear their perspective and experience with pattern testing too. I'm super excited to have Tina of One Rule Bejeweled with me here today. Her Instagram handle is down in the description below, so make sure you go follow her on Instagram. If you're on Instagram, she does all sorts of testing and makes lots and lots of gorgeous things. I have been blessed to test with Tina in the past, but I don't know if she's tested for me yet, but she is just a wonderful person, and I enjoy working with her and chatting with her every time I get to, and I'm excited to welcome her. Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I am doing very well, thank you.
Fantastic. I was just saying, I think we met via testing.
We did. I can't remember exactly which of the 100,000 tests I've done that we participated in together, but yes, we have.
You know what? I'm so glad that you say that, though, because Amy, the first person I interviewed, was like, I think we tested on something. And I was like, I don't remember.
Yeah. I actually did test a pair. I did test for you. I tested a pair of, it was a cowl. That's what it was.
Okay.
But it was like eons ago. It was like one of my first ones. So,
which is probably one of my first ones too.
Yeah.
I love it. So I've got yarn behind me.
Yes.
You do not. Tell us a little bit about where you're at and what you got going on back there.
Yes. So I'm actually in my she shed, aka craft room, aka virtual classroom. And this is the space, the corner of my yarn room that I use to teach in. And I use the space to teach just my brick and mortar kids when we were virtual for COVID, but I also use it to teach children in China and teach them English. So I just haven't taken it down because it's pretty and it's not in the way. So I left it up.
It looks amazing. I can tell that you're a fantastic teacher just by that setup behind you. That's
Thank you.
So cool. So you taught at a brick and mortar where you are live typically, except for with COVID. And at the same time, you taught virtually in China as well?
You are correct. I would get up at about 5:15 and I would teach my first class by 5:30, and I would teach 3 30-minute classes. And then by 7 o'clock, I was off of the computer and I was rushing to my brick and mortar class.
I was kind of, first of all, I'm not great with geography, so I do know where China is.
Right? Who doesn't?
Specific like cities in China, probably not so much, but I do know where China is. But I was kind of processing after I asked that question that, I bet the time difference is such that they are in school before we are. What is the time difference?
Right. So it's about 12 hours when it's not daylight savings time. So when I would teach my lessons at 5:30 a.m., it was 5:30 p.m. for them. So of course, you know, we've learned that a lot of times they would go to school all day and then they'd have even more extracurricular things. And I was one of their extracurricular things that they did was learning English.
Yeah. Okay. So cool. I wish I had learned a foreign language as a child, because by the time I got to high school, my brain was just not.
I understand. Interestingly enough, to do that job, I actually did not have to know any Chinese. It was full immersion. So I had to do a lot of total physical response of moving my hand, showing props, showing pictures and things like that to get them to understand what I was saying. But I actually did not have to know any Chinese. I learned a few things. If you were to ask me a few things, I probably couldn't repeat anything other than ni hao. But it was fun. I really enjoyed it.
What age level were you teaching?
Okay, so I typically stuck with the younger children. So they could be as young as 4 years old was the youngest that I taught, but I also taught up to 15 years old. but it ends
Oh,
up being about like a third grade English speaking level
sure,
is kind of like what I was teaching them. But it was a
sure,
huge
sure.
range.
That is a huge
It was a
range.
huge range, yeah, and it was one-on-one, which made it easier, so, it's not like a
Oh,
classroom full of children, it's just kind of like this, just one child on the screen, we can all see the PowerPoint together, and it was pretty neat, I really liked it, we made some good connections, there's some children that I taught the entire 4 years I was working there, yeah, so we really built some bonds and even exchanged gifts internationally, which was a lot of fun.
oh, that's so cool.
It really
So
is.
I was a music teacher, so I also got to teach kids year after year after year, and that was one of my favorite things, was watching them come in as these
Yes.
little teeny tiny kindergartners and then seeing them go off as
Yeah.
fifth graders, as like big
Yeah, which is
big
kind of
kids.
bittersweet though, because once they leveled out of what I was teaching them, they had to go to someone else, and I'm like, "Oh." That's
Yeah,
always the hard part, but, as a teacher, you get used to it, but not.
yeah, yeah. There are always those kids that you're just so sad to
Yeah.
see move
Mhm.
on. You're like,
Yeah.
I know
And I
you need to go fly, but also I would keep you forever.
right, don't forget about me.
That's right. Come back and
Right.
visit.
Yeah, it
I
was
love
pretty
it.
nice. Mhm.
I love it. So, what grade do you teach here in the United States?
I teach 3rd grade, and it is the very best grade ever, and, I could argue with a whole lot of people, but I'd be like, "Come fight me," because this is the sweet spot for sure.
You do not need to argue with me.
Yeah.
I always said so. I homeschooled my boys last year. It was not amazing. I'm not a trained classroom teacher, but as a music teacher, my job was always on the chopping block.
Yeah. Yeah.
And um, I always said if I were ever going to go teach in the classroom, it would be third grade. You're right. It is the sweet spot. They are still little and adorable and they
Yep.
love to be silly and they're
Yep.
not easily embarrassed,
Right.
but they can tie their shoes.
They can tie their shoes. They wanna please you, so they don't really most of them don't really have that attitude yet,
Mhm.
and they just wanna be loved, and, I can be silly and playful with them, and they get it, but then they
Yeah.
also have this level of independence that kind of grows throughout the year, and you just kind of nurture that and just it's a wonderful age. Absolutely love
It
it.
is.
They're my
Yeah.
people for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love it. So we talked a lot about your teaching career. Tell us a little bit about some other facets of your life, where you're at, where you're from, what your
Yeah.
hobbies are, anything you want to share.
Okay. So I live in North Carolina and lived here for most of all of my adult life actually. And I other hobbies like crochet is
I
it. I'm
mean,
very like one track minded, but it kind of makes me think back to when I knew that we were going to have this conversation kind of on my maker journey. I thought back to as far as I could. And I was thinking like when I was a kid, I was always into coloring books and paper mache. And I was very focused on doing that all the time. And then I got to high school and I took a drawing class and all I wanted to do was draw and I was very focused on learning to draw. And then one day my mom sat down with me and she taught me a granny stitch and she didn't know how to read a pattern or anything like that, but she taught me a granny stitch and we started working on a blanket together. But then after that, shortly after 2-3 years of kind of us working on that, we never really finished it. And then she passed away shortly after that. So I put it down for a bit. I went to college. And then, of course, as a college student, you kind of don't have any money, don't have much to do. And one of my roommates also happened to be a crocheter. So it would be our treat once a month when we got our little like work study paychecks. We would go and get like cheap yarn and just make scarves. And they were horrendous and they were ugly, but that's kind of where it started. So that's when I started picking it back up when it became something that passed the time, something that I enjoyed. And then it just, I guess after teaching, after I started teaching, probably when I was about 24, I was just too busy. And so I would want to do quicker things. So then I got into beadwork and I was stuck with beadwork for a long time, making necklaces and earrings and stuff like that. But then I got bored with it and I came back to crochet and haven't looked back. And I'm focused on crochet.
I love it. I love your dedication to one craft at a time. I bet you really perfect them because you're so good at focusing. Do you focus like that within your crochet? Are you a one whip person?
No, 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 no. As a matter of fact, I get super bored. I mean, it is very rare for me to have fewer than 3 projects going at the same time, but I try not to go over 5. So just because you know how when you're working on a project and you have those long-term projects and it's the same stitch over and over, you know, it doesn't bring you joy. So then you just need a break for a second to pick up something that's a different stitch or something completely different. And so I always have multiple going, always.
Do you have a method to what you have going? Is there a certain number that are pattern tests and a certain number that aren't? Are you like one big, one small, one easy, one complicated?
That's how I do it. That's exactly how I do it. I will never have, so I really try not to have, for example, 2 fingering weight projects going at the same time. If I do, it has to be like a headband and then maybe a garment, something tiny like that. But definitely the level of difficulty matters too. I like to add variety in that. So I try and have one that's kind of challenging, but the other one have to be kind of brainless and mindless and I can finish because in the same night, I can pick up all 3 projects depending on how I'm feeling, but I need to have options. Got to have options.
I agree. I always have multiple projects going on. I have tried very hard to whittle it down because I do go over 5 very regularly.
It's easy to do.
It is, but yeah, I know people who do it one project at a time, and I think, gosh, I envy your focus, but I just don't have it in me.
I can't do it. I can't do it. And I actually, as far as like paid versus like test patterns, probably a year ago, I spoke with Creations by Courtney. I was speaking with Courtney and I was telling her how burnt out I was feeling about pattern testing. And she just came up with this, like, why don't you do like one paid pattern to every 2 pattern tests? So I can still feel like I'm doing something at my own speed that has no pressure, but still have the enjoyment and the satisfaction of supporting somebody through pattern testing. And so that's something that's really stuck with me. So that's why I say 3 is kind of where I try to stay, because I really try to honor 1 paid pattern versus 2 pattern tests. Am I like that all the time? No, you know, it doesn't always work that way, but that's one of the things that's really helped.
I think that's so smart. There is one of the things I'm trying to do is I'm trying to slow down a little bit with my designing, because one of the things I miss out on if I'm designing too much is pattern testing for other people. And even just working other designers' patterns that I'm a person too. I have eyeballs and I see those things out there and I want to make them too.
Yes. Exactly.
But when I'm too bogged down with all the things, I can't take time to do that. But I find personally that that's so important to my own personal creativity and spirit to be able to have some of those things where there's one, you know, it's already been worked through, so you don't even have to look for mistakes. You can just assume everything's fine. And then, like, if it gets done, it gets done. If it doesn't, it doesn't. If you get halfway through and you're like, meh, then you can just drag it and pick something different.
Yeah. And I think you're exactly right, because I think when you pick up those paid projects and let's say you have a mistake, you're like, well, I'm the only one who knows it's there. That's okay. You know, I can fix it. I don't have to worry about it, that kind of thing. Or I can make it longer or shorter, where when you're doing a pattern test, you have to be very meticulous. You have to pay attention. You have to do stitch counts. You have to get feedback and ask questions if something doesn't make sense. So it's a little slower and it takes work. You know, it does take some work as well.
Yes. Yep. You, when I'm just working a pattern, like if I didn't count stitches one row, whatever. But when I'm testing a pattern, I try really hard to be focused and meticulous. Do you like to take your crochet with you when you go places, like if you're heading out?
Absolutely. I will never leave my house without a crochet project. And I will never leave my house without a crochet project. If I'm going to, the only way I might is if I know I'm going to the grocery store and back, because I know I can't sit down and do anything. But I always have, my school bag is actually filled with 2 projects. It doesn't have schoolwork in it. It has 2 crochet projects in it. And my kids are used to seeing me crochet every day at recess. And I'm getting quite the following. You know, I even have a student who puts out my yoga mat outside and he puts my red bag next to me and he brings me the walkie-talkie and I just have to come outside and sit like a little queen. But yeah, I have kids who show it with their little bags, and sometimes I'll see the parents and they'll say, we have to carry this project bag now thanks to you. And I'll say hashtag sorry, not sorry, you know. But yeah, I do. And I just think it's really fun because I think it's an art that a lot of people technically think is for old people, or the stuff that you make looks handmade, right? But I think too, when I also have made a commitment to myself based on a challenge from students 2 years ago, that I wear every single thing I make. And I'm wearing something I've made every single day to work. And if there's a day that I don't, the kids call me out. And I could say this year that's only happened 3 days. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it could be something as small as a pair of earrings, but they will ask. They you can tell they look me up every day to see what it is. So it's one of those things that it sticks with me. I have to take it with me. It's like having a security blanket. I don't like sitting still anywhere. So we're doing EOGs this week, and I kind of want to just walk around in a circle and crochet, you know, that kind of thing, but I can't.
Yeah.
But that's what I want to do. But it's kind of neat because the kids have most of them have just as much enthusiasm about crocheting as I do. Anytime they have a free moment, like when I'm reading out loud, half my class crochets while I'm reading out loud. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. I need to take pictures. It warms my heart. I'm like, of course I can read for another 10 minutes. Yeah, you keep doing you. Keep listening, right? Because I know what it's like.
Just one more row.
Yes. I listen to audiobooks when I crochet, so I totally get it.
Yes. So do you teach the students to crochet then?
I do. And it's kind of funny because my own class, of course, I have more access to them. So we can do it when we have indoor recess, or if we have 15 minutes in the morning or the last 10 minutes of the day. But there are students who are like on our same hall, like the second graders, that will see me crocheting outside at recess. And they'll want to sit around me and they want to see what it is, and I'm letting them touch the yarn and telling them about I try to, I give them yarn, I give them hooks and let them touch it and feel it, and they have questions. Oh, you made that? Oh my gosh. And so they get really excited too, and that just warms my heart. It really does.
That's really great. How cool for them. They're going to have such a cool story to share someday.
I hope so. I hope so.
Where did you learn how to crochet?
My third grade teacher. I didn't learn how to read, but I learned to crochet. That's what's going to stick with them. Yep. I still can't multiply, but I can crochet you a hat.
Some days that's more handy because we got that calculator on our phone. It's fine.
That is true. And I think for some kids too, when reading and math is a struggle, having an outlet like the arts, like music or writing or crocheting showing them that they're good at something, it's a huge confidence booster. Huge.
Absolutely. Not everybody fits inside that school curriculum box. And it's important. Those people who are outside the box are so valuable to our society and our world. They are the people that are going to come up with the off the wall idea and invent the next thing that like changes the world. And it's so great that you can encourage them and their creativity and their different type of intelligence through craft.
Yeah, it wasn't something I ever expected to do at all. And I also want to attribute some of my love for crochet has grown because they're excited about it. So I'm really interested in showing them all the things you can do with it, and I almost feel it's like a responsibility. I've introduced them to this thing and I want to show them that the world is really endless with this craft. So it's a lot of fun just to work with them and see them in a different way than not just being readers and writers, but also artists.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. I would love to see, I bet they come up with some really unique and creative things. The great thing about crochet is you can take it anywhere. And so that can be a frustration in the beginning when you're like, where does my stitch go? How do I turn that?
Right.
But I could just keep going around that corner by accident.
Yeah. And the great thing I've told them, I said, you can't break it. You can't break it. If you make a mistake, frog it. And yes, I've taught them that term. Just take it out. I said, that's it. I said, you can't break it. You can't ruin it. It's okay. You made a tangle. Let's clip it out. Let's add a knot here and let's keep going. That kind of thing. So yeah, I think it makes that's a little bit of a net for them because they realize it doesn't have to be perfect. They can just take it out and try again, which you can't do that
Yeah.
with a lot of things.
Right. And I think that's something that as yarn crafters, we lament the frogging a lot of
Yes.
times, but really it's a blessing to be able to do it because you put paint on that canvas, you're not taking it off.
Yep, you're absolutely right.
You throw a half a cup of you know,
Too much
whatever.
water, too much soy
Oh,
in a
right,
meal.
too
That's
much
it.
flour, too much
Mhm.
what into your baking and it flops. You can't be like, "Oh, I'll just take those cupcakes out and add a little more sugar."
Mhm.
That's
That's it.
not a
It's a
thing.
done deal. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
It's funny
yeah.
that you say that. I had a student who he is working on making a shirt. So he's just going to have a simple two rectangles, a front and a back panel. And he made his front panel. And it's not perfect, but the fact that he has this like 14 by 14-inch like square, the kids are amazed that he stuck with it that long, that it's actually a square. And then he said, okay, so now I got to do the back. Oh, now I have to do the back. you know? So he started working on that about a week ago, and he came to me today and he started noticing his back panel was starting to curve. And I talked to him. I said, why do you think it's starting to curve? And he says, I think I'm crocheting too loose. I think I put too many stitches here. So I love that he's even learning from his mistakes because that means he's going to be able to figure that out later. And there's lots of times he'll just come to me and he'll just say, well, can you do this? No, I can't. I taught you how to do that. So yeah, he kind of goes, fine. But I think he gets much more satisfaction at the fact that, yes, I taught him, but Miss Smith did not make this shirt for him. I made it myself. And there's nothing like being able to tell somebody that. So he'll thank me later.
Yes, yes. And wow, what great problem solving skills to be able to take something like that and look at it and say, hmm, what did I do wrong? And
Yeah.
how could I improve it in the future?
Yeah.
And man, I'm impressed. I mean, there are lots of grown-ups who won't make an entire garment.
Right.
And so the
Right.
fact that he's like
He recognized
committed to
it.
that,
Yeah. And he said, so what do I do? I said, well, you have two choices. I said, you can frog it. I said, or you can keep going and know you're going to have a lopsided panel. I said, but you're going to wear that shirt with a lopsided panel. And he was like, no. He's just sort of frogging. It was the cutest thing. And he also discovered that his chain was too tight, which is a common issue. And
yes.
so I said, well, one thing you can do is just use a bigger hook or chain looser. And of course, as beginners, they often chain too tightly, that kind of thing. So he did do it a little bit looser. And he was like, I'm glad I started over because it's even now. He only got through about 4 rows today, but he could already see it's not curving like it was. So I think in the long run, he'll be happier with it.
As we all usually are when we just give in and do what we knew we need to do and frog it back.
Yep. 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 And what's interesting too is surprising the boys are the ones who want to crochet more than the girls. The girls
That's awesome.
can, but as far as like garments and making stuffed animals and beanies and bags and the boys are making that and they're gifting them to their moms or to me, depending on what they're making. So, and they get impatient where they'll take the hook and the yarn home and they'll come, look, Miss Smith, I made a beanie, that kind of thing. And it's all jacked up, but it fits on their head and they're proud. And that's what matters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, that's so cool.
Mhm.
So tell us a little bit about how you got into pattern testing.
So, once I started picking up my hook again, I realized that there was a lot more to learn. The only thing I could make was a rectangle. So you'd make scarves and cowls and ear warmers, but you can only do that for so long before you get bored, right? So then I started teaching myself to read patterns, and I just went to YouTube University and found lots of different videos and sat with them, like most of us do when we learn new stitches and things like that. And I did that for a while. And then after reading some patterns, I tried a few patterns myself and I was like, I can do this. I can do this. And I can't even remember. I know what it was. I was in a Facebook group. I think it was Made's community group. And she called for a pattern testing. And I said, what's a pattern tester? And so then I started kind of doing some research and I applied. And that was my very, very first test I ever did was with Denise from Made. And that's how I got into it. She was someone that I feel like was really instrumental to my pattern testing development because not only did she allow me to test for her with zero experience, I had no images on, I didn't have an Instagram at the time. I had a Facebook, but I didn't really use it, right? So there was no way for her to see what my skills were. So I kind of feel like she took a chance on me and then walked me through each step. So when I was trying to find a hook and a yarn and meet gauge, and she was just so patient the whole time. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed that experience. I enjoyed learning. I enjoyed understanding how stitches fit together and how a pattern is organized and how a design comes to fruition. And I was hooked. I was literally, pun intended, hooked. So that's kind of where it started. And then from there, it's kind of like a drug. You have this feeling and satisfaction of making something. And then you want to show someone, this is actually something I made and I can wear. And then you go to the street and people are thinking, oh, that's a nice sweater. Thanks, I made it. And so just getting that was kind of fun. But I also kind of felt like after working with her, I want to continue to not only grow my skills, but it was a great way to kind of give back to the yarn community too, and meet people and network and learn even more, because I learned so much through that one pattern test. I was like, I can only imagine what I can learn from other designers. So that's really what got me into it, is wanting to work with other designers too and learning.
What did you make for your first pattern test?
It was the it's funny, I remember that. It was the Lorelei cardigan by Handmade, and it was a white one. And now that I think back and I know more about yarn, I chose a yarn that was probably more appropriate for blankets. But it was a white sweater. I absolutely loved it. I was super proud of it. And it was warm. I can only wear it in the winter, right? But that was my very first one. And I just had such a pleasant experience. I was like, I've got to do this again. How can I get into more? And so then I decided I got to get an IG, because she mentioned that's where I can find more opportunities. I didn't have one at the time. So I started trying to not only find more opportunities, but then using my IG as like my portfolio.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's how I got started.
Had you ever made a cardigan before?
So yeah, so what had happened was I I did buy a skein of yarn, and it was a Sorella pattern. I think it was like her easy cardigan or something like that. And it had a video tutorial, and I still was not successful with that, because one sleeve was too wide and the other one was too tight. And then the collar bent weird. And I'm thinking, how is it that I messed up on this pattern when there's a video tutorial? And that was because I knew nothing about gauge and that kind of thing. So that was my first, I wouldn't even call it a wearable, but it was my first attempt at a wearable like that.
But you had attempted before you volunteered.
I did try.
Yeah. It
didn't go well. It didn't.
We have all had that experience.
Mm-hmm.
When I look back, I went so long without knowing about gauge that it baffles me that I made so many things that actually looked decent and fit me, knowing so little about gauge.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing how much of a difference that makes. It's and then to know, the idea of people like pattern testing or making something that's wearable with no gauge, you're like, oh, it's just a gas. What do you mean I just went for it? What do you mean? How do you know what's going to fit? How do you invest hours, days, weeks into something that you don't know is going to fit? Makes me cringe. Now I'm obsessed. I have to gauge everything, even if it's a paid item and it's just for me. I still gauge all the time.
I have just gotten to the point where for the longest time, I felt like making gauge was, it felt, even though logically I knew, it felt like a waste of time, right?
Yeah.
I just want to make the thing. Yep. I don't want to have to take the time to gauge swatch. But after having frogged enough things, or ending up with something and being like, oh, I just don't really like it.
Right.
The waste of time is not gauge swatching, because you are really gambling with ending up with an entire whatever.
Exactly. A pile of yarns, you can't do anything with it. That doesn't look right. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I actually set aside a full day to gauge swatch. So if when I get a pattern test, I won't start it immediately. I pick a day that I'm going to sit down and just make gauge swatches, not start the pattern. I
Mhm.
don't start the pattern on the same day that I make the gauge swatch ever. I give myself a full day of space to play with yarn, to play with different hooks, and try to make a gauge swatch that works in a fabric that I like. And I think by allowing myself a full day to do that, I don't feel stressed about it. It's part of the process to me because
Mhm.
I know I'm not going to start that project today. I just want to know what hook am I using and what yarn I'm using. That's it. That's all I'm doing. And it really helps.
I think that's genius. And I think you like breezed over something there that I think is super important. You said, do I meet gauge and do I make a fabric I like?
Mhm.
Because you can like you said, you can meet gauge with a blanket yarn
Yep.
for a cardigan, but should you?
Right.
I mean,
No.
sometimes yes, sometimes
Right.
it's totally fine, but other times like um one of the things that I didn't know when I first started out was that yarn designations are like a spectrum, not like a
R
tablespoon.
exactly. Yep.
I thought oh, worsted is worsted is worsted,
Worsted
but
is
like
worsted. Yep. Mhm.
you can if the designer used a really light worsted and you use something that's like closer to an Aran weight,
Yeah.
which there are a lot of Aran weights that they just label as worsted because in the United States people don't know what Aran weight means,
Right.
and you can meet gauge with that, but if you've got this like stiff
Stiff fabric.
fabric, is
Yeah.
that really what you want?
Yeah,
And
which
I
is what
mean
I ended
sometimes
up with.
it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes, if you're making a bag or
Right.
a basket or something like that, sometimes stiff fabric is key. But in the same respect, if you go in the opposite direction, if you are testing a basket and you make your gauge swatch and you end up with this really floppy
With holes
fabric,
in it. Yeah.
yeah, you met gauge, but your basket is gonna look like it
Has no
melted.
integrity. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's what happened with my very first sweater. So it felt warm and nice, but the fabric was stiff. It did help when I washed it, but I realized what my mistake was. Like I started paying attention to fiber content and gauge, of course, because like I said, I met gauge, but it was such a dense fabric. It just wasn't comfortable to wear.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a lot to yarn craft
There
deeper than
is.
just like picking up a pattern and a hook and a yarn and diving in.
It
And
is.
I think a lot of people think like I'll just stick with it,
Yes.
like I've chosen these things and but man, if you're I love that you wear all of your makes. I think that's really important. And if you're not going to wear it, take it apart.
Yeah.
That yarn can
Yeah.
always be used for something else and something that
Exactly.
it's more appropriate for, and then you can love what you make with that
Right.
yarn and
Right.
love the pattern that you use
Exactly.
making it
And
with a
wear
more
it.
appropriate yarn.
Like
Yes.
I can't tell you the last time I bought a shirt. I know it had to be 3 years ago at least, like, I because I make my shirts. I can't tell you the last time I bought a shirt or scarf
That's
because I wear it.
fantastic.
So it
I
has to be a fabric I'm gonna wear.
Yep, that's awesome.
Mhm.
Fantastic. So it sounds like you have, and I'm not at the least bit surprised by this, a process you go through when you're testing. Can you share that process with us? Because
Sure.
I dove into my first pattern test. I volunteered on a whim for a very large designer, and then I was like, "Oh my gosh, I never should have done that. I'm just this little piddly account. She won't pick me." And then she did, and then I was like, "Oh my gosh, what am I gonna do?"
Yes.
And she just because this was her style, she just sent the pattern out in an email and said, look for mistakes and let me know. There was no group chat. I had no idea what I was doing.
Yikes, yeah.
And
Yikes.
so I think it would help a lot of people for you to share what you go through step by step so that
Yes.
if they
Yes.
end up in that situation too, they have some guidance.
Okay. So at the beginning, for sure, I was just like that. I tested all the things, probably had 5 or 6 things going at once, and I'm loving it and I'm loving it. And then I'm realizing life is getting busy and the deadlines are coming, and supposed to me enjoying this process, I'm stressed out.
Yeah.
And so my process is I actually use a calendar. I have an app on my phone. When I apply to a test, I actually put it in my calendar so I know that I've applied. That way, if there's another test I want to apply for or something else I'm currently working on, I can see kind of like, will I have time for this? And I've tested enough patterns to know how long it takes me to make a fingering garment versus how long it takes me to make a bulky weight one. So I've tested enough to know how to do that. So I always put it in my calendar when I applied for the test and what it is. I have a little sticky note there. And then if I do get selected, what I'll do is, like I said, I set aside a day where I'm going to gauge. And then I move that sticky note on my phone to when the deadline is. And that way I know I still have a project that has that I'm still responsible for a project on my calendar. That way, if I want to test something else, that's still there, and I'd make sure not to overbook myself. That's something I probably started doing maybe in the last less than a year, maybe 8 months. It wasn't like that before, but I started getting really burned out about a year ago, and I was like, I can't keep operating like this. So I would plan my pattern tests, and I even planned when I was going to work on paid patterns, and that helped a lot. And as a teacher, it kind of comes automatically. I'm like, duh, why didn't I think about planning these tests and these projects? It makes a lot of sense.
And I think that's so smart that you put it in when you apply,
Mhm.
because sometimes it can be several weeks before you hear back.
Yep.
And you could have, I mean, let's be honest, you could have applied but for 5 or 6 more tests by then. And if that one slipped your mind,
Yes.
especially if it's a larger test and all of a sudden you've got 3 or
4
4
garments
designers
due within
coming
a
and
week.
saying,
Yeah.
right,
Mhm.
yes. And
Mhm.
you're like, ah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and something else I was gonna mention about that. Uh, it slipped my mind, but hopefully it'll come back. But there was something about a calendar thing. Anyway, brain fart. I don't remember. Maybe it'll come back to me.
So that's great that you put them on your calendar
Mhm.
then when you apply. So,
Oh, that was a thing. Now that you said that, I remember what it was. It was if I don't get selected, then I'm like, oh, I have extra time. So even if I don't get selected or something, I can just delete it from my calendar and I just have more wiggle room for other things. So it never hurts to just write it down somewhere.
absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. Do you keep a list of things that like patterns that you've seen for testing that either you didn't get selected for or that you've said, "Oh, I don't have time for that." Do you keep like a running list of things that you're going to come back to for your paid time in the future?
Honestly, no. Because I know that designers and their testers will often advertise when that pattern's about to be released. So I'll get reminded. And you know how like you go into a store, not that I know this feeling, yes I do, but you go into a store and you're like, oh, I really want this sweater, but I don't want to pay that much for it. So then you leave for a day, but you're still thinking about it and you're like, I need to go back in to get that sweater. It's kind of like that. So if that pattern comes out and I still have that same sense of urgency to have it, then I'll go buy it. But sometimes that pattern will be released and I'm like, okay, I'm over it. I don't really need it right now. I'm not ready to work on it right now anyway. So I know it's there. If I think about it again, I'll come back to it. But I try not to keep that running list because, you know, crochet is always changing. Projects are always coming up and there's always more patterns to do and more things to do. And so I try not to limit myself to having to come back to that unless I still have that same sense of excitement.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've started telling myself that I'm gonna if I really love something and I know I'm gonna want to make it, I put it on my favorites on Ravelry. But I've been trying to be better about not purchasing until I'm ready to make, because I can get quite the pile up.
Yeah. So that's funny that you say that because Ravelry is something that I know I'm just barely scratching the surface of using. I post my projects there and that's it. Yeah, I buy patterns there as well. But as far as like what you said, putting it in your favorites, or I don't even know what that like, I don't even know where to go to find where my favorites are in Ravelry. Like I click the heart and then I'm like, okay, so where do I go to find this? And so I know that that's actually a really good idea because it reminds me that I probably need to tinker with Ravelry a little bit more and figure out, you know, what other potential it has because I know I'm only posting my projects and I do that as part of the testing process, right? So not
Mhm.
only is that a digital portfolio for myself, but part of the testing process is many designers will ask for you to make a projects page. And even if they don't, I do it because it's my portfolio. Not to mention, if I want to make that item again, I'd like to know what hook I used and what yarn I used. And if I changed the dimensions or added something to it, I need to know what I did. So but I know that Ravelry has more potential than that. So maybe I'll have to, after this, we'll have to figure, you can maybe tutor me on that because
There
I
we
know I'm
go.
missing stuff. I know I
Yeah,
am.
at some point I would love to do, I have a tutorial on how to make a project and how
Okay.
to link it to a pattern, for partly because pattern testers have asked for assistance with that. But
Hmm.
you're right, Ravelry has all sorts of features and stuff that even some of them that I haven't really dove deep into, but there's a lot of potential and a lot of stuff you can
Hmm.
do there. Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
really cool.
And maybe that'll be my
So
assignment to myself sometime when I am
there
not
you go.
working.
On a break from school, you take some
Yeah.
time to
Hmm.
tinker around. You have to put it on your
Coming
calendar.
soon. It's coming soon. We get out on the 30th. So it's been long.
That's exciting.
Mhm.
So you put the pattern test in your calendar when you apply. Once you have hear that you have been asked to test something, then what do you do?
Okay. So then what I'll do, I literally will give myself 2 days. Like I don't pick it up. I will give myself headspace for it so I can work on maybe another project. Or a lot of times I'm challenging myself. I'm constantly challenging myself. Can I finish this in 2 days? I'm gonna finish this in 2 days. I'm gonna finish this before I start that pattern test. And so it motivates me to maybe finish something else up. That way I'm not juggling 4 or 5 projects at the same time. So I'll put it to the side and work on something else and then come back to it. And it'll be one of those projects that just come in rotation. And I brought this, and this, I know it looks ghetto fabulous, but it works for me. So at the Dollar General, you know how they have like a place where they have like monthly receipt books and stuff like that. I made my yarn thing here where I'll put like, I can't believe I'm showing you this, but you know, we're all friends here. Okay. So I'll put like a pocket that has test on here, test. So I know which ones are testing ones. And then I'll have others that aren't testing projects that I'm doing. And I'll print the pattern and I'll organize this. I'll purge things that I've done. I'll
Mhm.
organize the stuff in here. Sometimes I can stick the hook in here. I can stick the pattern in here. Any sticky notes I have, I can stick it with that same project. So I usually try and set this up. So I'm usually going through this like probably 2 or 3 times a month, like just reorganizing it. And that's how I stay organized with all of it. And what I like about it, like I said, I can just kind of fold the pattern and stick it in that pocket and take it out when I'm ready to use it. So
So
that's
you've
my
got a pen
organization
there.
system. I do. I got a pen and sticky notes, and I have a gauge ruler in there just in case I'm not near one, even though I always am. But I try to make it simple because being on the go, usually if I'm on the go, it's a project that I've memorized already, but also maybe it's not. So I can take that whole book and it's not that big, you know, it's just
Mhm.
papers. I can take that whole book with me and work on what I want.
I think that's genius.
Works for me.
I love it. And that's like
Mhm.
the perfect tool
It
because
is.
at first when you brought that up, I thought it was just going to be like a notebook, but that's actually like
It's like
it's got
folders.
pockets and
Yes.
stuff.
Hmm.
That's so smart. You said you got that at the dollar store?
Yep, I did.
I
Yep. Yeah, it
love
cost
it.
me $3. Yeah. But I like it's like my crochet, like that's my world in that little book. And it's a mess and you can tell I've used it. It's well loved, but it's a system that works. On the test, on the little sticky note, I can put the due date on there. That way I'm eventually from seeing it, I can memorize, oh, this is due July 10th, this is due July 24th. And a personal challenge of mine is always to finish early. I try to finish at least a week early. I don't want to finish on deadline day. To me, like that puts stress on me. But I also like knowing that, you know, it's done, but I just got to take pictures, you know, that works for me too. So it keeps me organized. But that's something I've only been using for the past maybe 6 months. So it's definitely a learning curve.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, but what a great tip so that other people can pick it up right away and don't have to
Hmm.
wait. And I love that you put a sticky note on there with the due date as well,
Yes.
because that's something that I think is it's I'm totally the type of person who like gets something in my head and I think I know
Yeah.
and I think I know, but
Mhm.
sometimes I know, but
Right.
sometimes I don't know.
Don't know. Mhm. Or you've mixed up the date, or you thought this project was due on this day, but it's really that project. And yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's so smart to
That's
have
never
that
happened to
right
me.
there.
Yeah.
Me either.
Yeah, you know, you learn from your mistakes, right? So,
Exactly.
mhm.
Exactly. All right. So you give the first thing you do is you give yourself some space. What do you do next? Is that
So
your gauge swatching day?
yep. gauge swatching. And so I'll gauge swatch, and I typically will have a list, and I actually go through like do you want me to show you this little corner here? Let's see if I can show
Sure.
it to you.
Yes.
Okay. So this, like,
Ooh.
there's a lot of yarn. Okay, so I have my own little yarn store here. Sorry if I'm making you nauseous. But I will go through and I'll literally stand here and like touch the fibers and figure out, because I don't have it organized any way that makes sense to anybody else. But it makes sense to me where I know where my cobble yarn is. I know where my cotton yarn is. I know where, this yarn is. So I'll go through and I'll have my phone, and based off of whatever the designer yarn is they're using, I guess I try to figure out what the thickness is, the density of it. And it was a strategy I learned from reading MJ Off the Hook blog, where you divide like the ounces or the grams by the number of yards. So I'll go through my room and I'll figure out what yarns meet that. And so usually when I'm ready to sit down and gauge, I'm gauging 3 or 4 yarns to see again what the fabric is, if it feels right, if I think this is the intention of how this yarn is supposed to drape, that kind of thing. So after I do that gauge swatch, I put it down for a second. And then when I come back to it, I make its little project bag, its own little project bag. And the bag will have the hook. It'll have all the yarn. It'll have the pattern in there, unless it's sitting in that little sleeve thing that I showed you. And it kind of sits next to me in a basket, and it just rotates with the rest of my projects until it's done.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Yes. Everything that stays at home with me gets a basket. Everything that is coming on the go gets a project bag.
I hear you. And I assume everything's coming on the go. So everything gets a project bag, everything.
I 100%. I was just thinking about this the other day. I swapped out my purse. And so my mother-in-law was saying, "Oh, I like your purse." And so I said, "Oh, thanks." I have several purses that I have like hoarded over the years. And I told myself I need to use some of those before I bought a new purse, because I was thinking about buying a new purse. And then I started thinking, because I also had a project with me, but I bet I have a lot more project bags than I have purses.
Yes, I certainly do. I don't even carry a purse, but I have like 8 project bags. I have a bunch, but they're all pretty fancy. Like this is it's become my new obsession. Like I like the handmade like project bags. And this was made by a teacher friend of mine. Her name is Gwen Johnson, and I call her Gwenma because I used to work with her, and she was a great dear friend and mentor to me. And she is now retired, so she is spending a lot of her time. She crochets, but she sews a lot. So anytime I see an idea for a bag, I'll say, "Can you make me this? Can you make me this?" And so most of the project bags I have are made by her, and she is NC Needle and Hook if you're interested. So she has a website. She's on Instagram as well too. So you can check her out.
That's awesome. Oh, how special. Each of those has such great meaning then, too.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they really do.
I love it. Do you have any advice on like how you take notes while you're doing the test?
Yes. I know a lot of times, and I don't know if it's my age, but I have to print the pattern and write on it. So I'm writing what hook I use, not just the size, but the brand, because a clover hook I will crochet differently than maybe a furls hook or a prim hook. I'll write the hook size, the hook brand, and the yarn that I'm using. I'll even write if I have to have a tighter gauge or a looser gauge, because sometimes, depending on what you're doing, you're like, I can really make this work, but I got to remember to maybe have more tension or something like that. So as I take notes, I check off each row, each round, whatever the case may be. And then as issues come up, if there's something that needs to be added, I'll put like a plus symbol of what I think needs to be added. If there's a question or a place I'm confused, I'll put a question mark there and put it in the chat immediately. But then I have to come back to that question mark to see if the question was answered. I always try and read the pattern first and circle my size and try and like notice any grammatical errors. I may not notice any stitch work errors, but I might notice grammatical, like a period being out of place or a capital where it doesn't belong. So I'll read the pattern through first for grammatical errors, and I'll take my initial notes as to what yarn I'm using, the hook I'm using. And then as I'm going through the pattern, like I said, I check off things and I'll literally write all over it. So I actually keep all of my rough draft, all the pattern tests that I make, because my notes are on there. And if I want to make that again, I can see my notes. What I've started doing is try and make sure I take those notes and transfer them into Ravelry, because I've written all over that pattern. I can't read it. I spilled coffee on it, something like that. But I can print a fresh pattern that the designer emailed me, and I can still know what I did because I put it in Ravelry. So it's still a process that's a work in progress, but it's gotten easier, and I think it's more streamlined now too. And I like it. I'm comfortable with it. I feel like I can manage my time better. I can organize my projects better. And I enjoy crocheting all the time. And when it doesn't, when it doesn't bring me joy, I always say that it's not bringing me joy. I need to do something else. I'll make a pair of earrings or something quick, just to get that instant gratification to keep me motivated.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Projects are a great place for even if you are not a pattern tester or a designer, make projects for your finished items.
Yep.
Because that's a great place, you're right, to note your hook size that you used, to note what yarn you used, to note how many yards you actually used,
right.
Because what's estimated on the pattern isn't necessarily what you used. I mean, I just ran a test, and I had 10 testers, and not a single one of them hit my yardage smack dab on the nose. Mm-hmm. So if like I used a little more, I used a little less, that's mm-hmm. going to be super helpful if you want to remake it. And then the other thing that I love as a Ravelry user about projects is I love to go into a design that I'm thinking about making and look through all the projects and see what does it, because I can see a designer, and I mean, we're all different, right? I can see a designer who is, 6 foot tall and, very straight, and think, mm-hmm. that's beautiful on her, but I'm like closer to 5 foot and definitely not straight up and down. So if I can go into the projects and see someone with my body shape and see their project, and then see if they have notes on how they modified it.
Exactly. And the yarn that they used, I was thinking of using that same yarn, but I don't think I like how that stripes up. So maybe I won't use that yarn. There's so much you can get from looking at those projects. You're absolutely right. I'm the same way.
It's like a treasure.
Yes. Yeah. That maybe some people don't realize that they can do too. So yeah, definitely.
Well, and it's super helpful to you personally, like you were saying, to be able to make notes on like I needed my tension a little tighter. Here was the hook that I used. Here was the yarn that I used. It was a straight up and down pattern, and I added some shaping. Mm-hmm. I made the sleeves 2 inches shorter than noted. I decreased them more to fit my arm better, or I added a couple stitches at the top to make it a little wider sleeve at the top. All those things that you don't have to figure out when you go back next time. But also then somebody else who looks at it and says, oh, her body shape is exactly like mine. Then they're maybe just going to try to add the couple stitches ahead of time instead of doing like you maybe had to do and frog it back and try again.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's one of those things that, I think, like you said, you can go in the projects and see how other yarns work up and stuff like that, but also realizing that it helps you as a maker because you can see how they got that look, and what's going to work for you, or, determining it. Do I have to go down the hook size on this part, or do I need to go up a hook size? And so I really like that customization that it allows too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you do a lot of pattern testing. What are some of your whys? What are some of your favorite things about pattern testing that keeps you testing?
Well, I can't think of a pattern that I've done that I haven't learned something from. So I'm a teacher, and, you can be an expert teacher, but you can never be such an expert that there's not something else to learn, right? So with crocheting and pattern testing, it's the same way. It could be something such as abbreviations that someone might have used. And if I know that this abbreviation is used for triple crochet, when I see it somewhere else, I'll be more comfortable with it. Or even just the formats that different designers use, right? To me, it's kind of like learning different languages when you test for different designers, because everyone writes a little bit different. Sure, there's components that are standard, but everyone writes a little bit different. And you also have to be careful too, because you can have a designer that you test for a lot and you speak their language, right? So then when you start pattern testing, you realize, oh, that doesn't sound right. And really it's right, it's just different. So kind of making sure that I'm continuing to be well-rounded as far as myself being a learner still. Also just networking. I think the idea of meeting with designers, and I know a lot of pattern testers going to designing, but frankly, it's not something I want to do. I don't want to be a designer. And I'm not saying never, but I've said it for a long time. I respect designers so much. There is so much work that goes on behind the scenes of being a designer. I don't want it. I don't want to do that. I crochet for fun. So I feel like if I am designing, and yes, I'm not saying designing isn't fun, but it's work. And I've worked all day already. So when I come home, I don't want to work. I don't want to design. So I just like the idea of when I'm pattern testing, knowing that I'm still supporting someone, knowing that I'm still having a lot of fun, learning that I'm still learning and I'm making something for myself. But also trying to my expertise and what I've learned helps other people, and supporting a designer by promoting their design and taking a picture and putting it on Instagram and people asking questions, and I feel like I'm doing a good deed and hopefully sending business that designer's way, because they can see what I've done and they can see how I've tweaked it, or it's just fun. I think there's so much involved in pattern testing that even though I might slow down, and I have, it's never, I'm always going to be pattern testing. I'm just not testing 5 projects. I might be testing 2.
That's great. What are you working on right now?
Funny, you should ask. I brought my little basket here. So in this little, this bag, like I said, I have a project for each bag. This is, I'm making a garment using this is for Crow Knit Essentials. She has a top that came out, and it's pretty simple. It just has 2 panels, and so I'm working on a garment for her for that test, and then I'm also working on a shawl / wrap for Capital Crochet. And so even though these are both thin yarns, this is a 1 and this is a 2, and this one's mindless. And it's just a 1-row repeat, while this one is a 7-row repeat. So, the difference in the difficulty is also there as well. I'm also working on a project that I've been working on for a while. It is a cardigan for, I think she goes by Sunshine Queen Fiber Arts. Her name recently changed. I think that's right. And I apologize if I'm wrong. I'm working on a cardigan for her, and it's been like a long-term testing project. I've probably been working on that for a few months because the due date has changed, because, life happens. So the due date was pushed back. But that's something I know that I've planned to pick up. I've put that in my calendar to pick up at the end of June to make sure that I finish by the end of July. So I'm working on those 3 tests. And then I have a personal goal of mine to work on a lot of patterns from this book, which this has become one of my favorites is Selena Baca. And I always challenge myself, how fast can I make this garment? How fast can I make this garment? How fast can I make this garment? And so that book is actually called Crochet in a Weekend. So I'm really trying to see, can I really finish these projects in a weekend? And I worked up 6 of them already, and 5 of them I finished in a weekend, which is pretty neat. So that's like my paid personal project thing there. So I'm working on a couple. And I'm working on a small commission, making little like sunflower coasters and things like that, but it doesn't have a rush on it. So kind of staying true to my making sure I'm making time for my test and my paid projects I'm doing it, and I'm a happy camper.
Oh, good. I love it. Looks like you have lots of gorgeous things going there. That's so exciting.
I think so.
I love it. I love it. Okay. I'm going to ask you some this or that kinds of things.
Okay.
All right. Are you a book or a podcast person?
Now, when you say book, do you mean audiobook?
Sure.
It depends on the
It can
mood.
be both.
Yeah, it depends on the mood. Recently, I've
Mhm.
been doing lots of podcasts because I've wanted to see other projects that people are working on. I've started taking a crochet course that's, digital, so I can listen to that while I'm crocheting. So that's kind of podcasty. But 2 months ago, I would just binge listen to audiobooks. There was books I could not wait to listen to. I couldn't wait to come home and like listen to them. So it just depends on my mood. So I'd say both. That was a long answer.
That's totally okay. I'm right there with you. I go in cycles. There are times that I'm like book, 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 and then
Yep.
I'm just kind of like, I just need something I can listen to in
Right.
15 minutes and move on to something
And be
else.
done.
And
Hmm.
yep, yep, I love it. So we already know you love audiobooks. Do you prefer and did you read a lot of physical books before you crocheted?
I did. I
Do you
did.
miss it a little bit, or is it like,
Um,
nope, if I can crochet and listen, it's 100 times better?
it's kind of like that, but as the teacher in me, like I feel kind of ashamed, because sometimes I'm not picking up that paperback. But one of the things that I've done in my classroom is we do something called Dear Time, drop everything and
Mhm.
read. And I stopped reading too. Like, I mean, I stopped working. I read with them. Well,
Oh,
they're reading and I have a chapter book and I'm sitting someplace on the carpet reading my chapter book. So I still pick up that, a paperback, and I kind of feel nice picking up that paperback, and I'm setting the example of picking up a paperback and being still. But I feel guilty that I don't do it more often, but I can't say I don't do it at all, even if it's just 20 minutes a day.
I think that's great. I think
Mhm.
that's fantastic. Are you more of a sweater or a cardigan person?
Oof. I'm gonna say C, all the above. I love it all. I love both of those.
Do you get a lot of chance to wear sweaters uh, where you're at? Does it get cold enough?
Surprisingly, yes. It gets cold enough, but I also I try to be wise about the yarns that I choose. So, like, for example, one of my favorite sweaters that I made was one that I had tested for Crochet Highway, and it was her don't I can't think. It's her raglan top that she made, and I used, and I know that our winters are kind of mild, so I made sure that the yarn I used was a lightweight. So it was Kindred, which I think is a mixture of cotton and linen or something like that.
Hmm,
So I could still be comfortable in the winter, but still have that warmth because it's this dense sweater. So yeah, I do get to wear them.
that's great. When you're picking up a treat, are you a salty or a sweet person?
See all of the above. Seriously, I will put M&Ms in the popcorn. That kind of thing. I like them both. Hmm.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Which do you prefer least, swatching or weaving in your ends?
So, hmm. I actually, don't shoot me, but I like both. I don't
That's
mind,
great.
but weaving in ends does not bother me at all. I am the type that will weave in as I go.
Oh,
Um,
that's smart.
and on the few occasions where I do have ends that are loose, usually it's like the first one or the last one that I started. So I'm not tucking in that many. So I don't have a problem with either one. I know I'm like the gray person, right? I'm not a this or that. I'm like right there in the middle. I'm being difficult.
Not at all. Not at all. That's fantastic. Oh my goodness. That's all I have for you. It was
Okay, this was
so amazing to
fun.
chat with
Yes.
you.
I enjoyed this so much. I was so nervous, but you're so much fun to talk to, and I appreciate you having me.
I am so glad to have had
Mhm.
you. So thank you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Bye.
Oh my goodness. So much fun. I tell you every time. I do these out of pure selfishness. I love, love, love chatting with other makers, and I hope you enjoyed watching too. I'm going to put a bunch of links down in the description below. Go follow Tina. She's got all sorts of gorgeous makes, and she takes beautiful pictures of all of them. I'm going to link to some of my informative videos about things we talked about, like yarn substitution and gauge swatching. Those things can be complicated. And so I want to give you all my information that I've learned over the years. So you'll have to spend years sifting through all those things. So thank you. Thank you for joining me tonight. Have a great night and happy crafting.